So this is part 2 of the nonsense I was taught in relativity. So this is a carry on from part 1, where in part 1 I pointed out a lot of the background around relativity missed out and relativity was dumbed down. Now picking up from section 2 of the Open University booklet. First it will be a recap of what I said in part 1. It says, this is section 2, the constancy of the speed of light, and 2.1, what is meant by the speed of light. And this is where the problems properly start. Whatever is supposed to be meant by constancy of the speed of light ends up as a confusing mess. The relevant paper I'm going to refer to is this one. It's called 2 Myths About Special Relativity, and I'm referring to the myth about the constancy of the speed of light from that paper. And the paper says this: question, does the phrase the constancy of the speed of light have the same meaning today that it had when Einstein used it in 1905? And the answer is no. Today the primary meaning of the phrase is that given a specific burst of light, the burst speed is measured to have the same numerical value in all inertial frames. That is, the speed is constant with respect to changes in the reference frame in which it is observed. So what we note from that, the constancy of light speed has changed its meaning from when Einstein used it in 1905. Thus, when the Open University falsely presents that it's dealing with the same relativity as Einstein, that is an indication it's going to omit mentioning or dealing with the constancy of speed of light changing its meaning. So that's finishing with the recap from part 1, and now having to put that issue aside and carry on with what the rest of Open University says in its booklet. Open University says this: imagine that you're in a car travelling on a long straight motorway and your speedometer says 60 miles per hour. If you're overtaken by another car travelling 20 miles per hour faster, how would you answer the question, what is the speed of the overtaking car? You would probably say that it was 80 miles an hour. Most people would understand what you meant, even though an hour later the overtaken car would be only 20 miles ahead of you. However, if you wanted to be really clear, you would say that the overtaking car was travelling with a speed of 80 miles an hour relative to the ground. And it carries on like that, and I think that's quite obvious really what's going on. It's talking about Newtonian physics, and hopefully that is familiar to you, the viewer. Just going to skip over it and the diagram provided. The point that Open University is trying to make, however, is when it says this example of relative motion teaches us a simple but important lesson. Whenever a statement is made about speed, it must always include a convention about the reference point or reference body relative to which the speed is measured. This state of affairs is summarized by saying speed is a relative quantity. Whenever you are told the speed of some object, your immediate response should be to ask speed relative to what? Now let's look at a situation in which it is vitally important to remember to ask this question. And so this is what Open University says. as you saw in Unit 8, and that is another booklet, and it's dealing with Maxwell. It says Maxwell's electromagnetic theory predicts that light travels through a vacuum at a constant speed c, and that's given by that equation 1 given there. And Open University goes on to say, but what does Maxwell's predictions really mean? What reference point or reference body should be used when trying to interpret Maxwell's prediction? Question mark. Prediction being the equation. As you will see shortly, Maxwell's own answer to this question was quite wrong, though his method of calculating C remains valid. Try to formulate your own answer by considering the following question. And that's why I pause for a moment. Unfortunately, I'm noting we're not dealing with the earlier booklet. That would be a diversion. But the booklet saying that Maxwell's wrong means it's not really going by Maxwell's electromagnetic theory. Instead, relativity is wanting to amend Maxwell. And it's not often admitted that relativity is not going by the original Maxwell theory, but instead amending it. Open University carries on. It says, light from explosion on the surface of a distant star is depicted by a photographic plate on a satellite orbiting the Earth. Maxwell theory tells us that the speed of the light as it travels through space is c. Can you suggest 3 possible interpretations of Maxwell's prediction, i.e. his equation? In other words, can you name 3 objects or reference points relative to which the light may be moving with speed c? Question mark. My response to that is 3 possible interpretations of that equation. Ouch. And that is an issue that can be argued about, of how to interpret that equation. Open University carries on, any light signal that is seen must have originated somewhere. It must have travelled away from its source and eventually have fallen on a detector, such as a photographic plate. Otherwise, it would not have been observed. This simple analysis suggests 3 possible answers to the question. It seems likely that c, which is the speed of light, has one of the following 3 interpretations. First one is c must be the speed of light relative to its source. In this case, the distant star. This seems a rather natural and attractive possibility. Second possibility, c must be the speed of light relative to the space through which it propagates. This probably seems a rather strange alternative, since the vacuum of space does not appear to provide any obvious reference points. This ideal will be explained and clarified in section 2.3, and that's going to be coming on later, probably in my video after this. Possibility 3, c could be the speed of light relative to the detector. This may not seem very likely on the grounds that the light does not encounter the detector until the very end of its journey. And what I'm noting is it's saying there's 3 possibilities, but it's then going to say there are a lot more than just these 3 possibilities. This is what Open University says. Of course, there are many other possibilities, i.e. that's an emission. He's given 3 possibilities, but there are more. And it says, for example, c, which is the speed of light, may be the speed of light relative to the sun, though it's hard to see why a light ray travelling from a distant star to an orbiting satellite should have any special relationship to an ordinary star like the sun. Or c could be the speed relative to the Earth, though again there is no obvious reason why it should be. The 3 numbered possibilities listed above are the simplest and most plausible answers to the question. The rest of this section will be devoted to trying to decide which of any of the three possible interpretations is the correct one. So what Open University is doing is discarding most possibilities except for the three that it stated, because it deems those three are the simplest. And this is another example of trying to dumb things down. Really, it's a very complicated, much more complicated than what it's trying to present. But how often are you going to get a believer in Einstein's relativity admit that experiments, observations fit other theories than Einstein, but they are ignoring that? Answer, I think most of the time, never. Instead, they are going to falsely state Einstein's is the only possible theory for it. So dumb down, not going to mention the more complicated possibilities, and allow students to make the mistake and think there aren't any. I will have to come back to the issue that Open University is dealing only with the three simplest possibilities and ignoring any complicated possibilities. So bear that in mind. So I have to put aside the issue for the moment and continue with what the Open University text says. The text is repeatedly making omissions to gloss over things, and it's doing that to try to make the subject easier for students to understand, but it is completely distorting the subject. It is not a text to properly learn relativity from. Instead, it is a text to learn a dumbed down relativity that has grossly distorted the subject. The horror is that this dumbed down relativity by Open University and other educators create students that are in general totally unaware that what they have been taught is dumbed down, and mistakenly think what they have been taught is genuine undistorted relativity. So anyway, continuing with Open University. Open University says this. It's trying to deal with the first possibility that it mentioned. If light consisted of bullet-like particles that obeyed the laws of Newtonian mechanics, it would be very reasonable to interpret c as the speed of light relative to its source. You could imagine that the particles of light emerging with speed c from a luminous object were like bullets leaving the barrel of a gun with fixed muzzle velocity. If the gun were moving toward the target when fired, then the bullets themselves would move more rapidly towards the target than if the gun had been stationary. Similarly, if this ballistic picture of light is correct, light emitted from a source that is approaching the detector should have a higher speed relative to the detector than light from a source that is either stationary or moving away from the detector. This is a kind of mechanical view of light. That's why it's rather easy to picture. Newton would probably have been quite happy with this interpretation of the speed of light, but the question is it correct? Question mark. We need an experimental test to help us decide. So it's appealing to experiment, which is good. Theory should be connected to how it explains empirical evidence, and we're getting on to the empirical evidence now. Open University says, in principle, such an experiment is simple. All that is needed is a device that can measure the speed of light and a moving source of light. And my comment on that, the problem is the speed of light is very fast and it's difficult to do such experiments. So as a first piece of empirical evidence, OU appeals to astronomical observation because it can't do a direct experiment. Open University says nature provides the the required kind of source in the form of a multiple star. About a third of all the points of light seen as stars in the night sky are in fact systems consisting of two or more stars orbiting about their common centre of mass. Indeed, the closest stars to the Sun are those which form the triple system of Alpha Centauri, binary systems composed of just two stars are the most common of the multiple star systems. Many binaries are sufficiently close to the Sun that the two separate stellar components can be easily resolved with a small telescope, though of course even those nearby binaries are a few light years away. Open University carries on. Imagine a binary system in which one of the stars is very massive while the other is much lighter and performs circular orbits about its massive companion, as shown in figure 2. And that's going to be shown in a moment. Suppose that the speed of the orbiting star relative to its massive companion is 10 to the power 5 meters per second. And in order to avoid unnecessary complications, think of the Earth as being at rest relative to the more massive component of the binary system. Now consider an astronomer on Earth making observations of the orbiting star. So this is the figure 2 that is referred to. The star is going around a massive star and emitting light. When this orbiting star is at position A, it's emitting light at speed c plus v, and when it's at position B, it's emitting light at speed c minus v. And this is only based on the first possibility that the Open University is considering. So at the moment, it's from that theory, that's what you would be expecting. So what it says, when the orbiting star is at position A, it's moving towards the Earth with speed v, and any light that it emits should, if the bullet light theory is correct, have speed c plus v. When observed from the Earth, similarly, half an orbit later, when the star is at position B, it's moving away from the Earth with speed v, and the light that it emits should have speed c minus v relative to the Earth. So relative to the Earth, the speed of the light coming from the orbiting star depends on the point in the orbit at which it was emitted. The Open University carries on to say, in practice, observations of binary stars show that the speed of light from the orbiting star always has the same value, irrespective of the point in the orbit at which it was emitted. Such observations fail to detect any evidence that the speed of light is influenced by the motion of its source. A number of non-astronomical experiments, one of which is shown in TV 12, and that's referring to a TV program, and I might show that further on in my series of talks on this, lead to the same result. There is simply no experimental support for the idea that the speed of light depends on the motion of its source. In view of such experimental evidence, we must rule out the idea that light consists of particles that obey the laws of Newtonian mechanics and have speed c relative to the source. And my comment on this is it's a completely inadequate treatment of this astronomical observation. So just going by that account, you can be deceived into taking on faith what it claims. What Open University is doing is trying to discard one of the three simplest alternatives to Einstein's relativity and omits to deal with a more complicated possibility in the above example. Remember, I said I will have to come back to the issue that Open University is dealing only with the three simplest possibilities and ignoring any complicated possibilities. So it means I have to dig out an account that deals with it better. So this is the book I'm going to go by. So going by the book now instead of Open University. This book on physics says one of the objections coming to mind immediately when one tries to comprehend the speed of light as a limit that cannot be exceeded by any signal stems from the addition of velocities observed when an object is dispatched from a carrier moving at speeds far below the speed of light. It is argued that an observer approached by a light source with velocity v should, upon measurement of the speed of light, reach and find the value c plus v. If c is the speed of light emitted by a resting source, this expectation is not borne out by various types of experiments, among which the observed regularity of the projection of double star orbits against the background sky, and it's referring to some figures which I'm going to show, is perhaps more easily appreciated. So these are the figures which this book is referring to, and it's a hypothetical double star system, the same as what the Open University booklet was dealing with, and it's showing you a figure B where this is what you would expect to observe if speeds of were added in the way they were saying. After going through the mathematics, the book says nothing of this kind has ever been observed. So it's in agreement with what Open University says, but then the booklet goes on to say offers the solution of what is happening. So the book says this: one possibility avoiding contradiction in this particular example would be given if there existed a preferred coordinate system or ether, a preferred frame or an ether frame, with respect to which an absolute velocity could be defined and which had the property of transmitting light at the fixed speed c. The idea of an ether suggests itself by an analogy with the propagation of sound, which requires some underlying medium, air for example, for transmission, in which one observes the speed of sound independent of the velocity of the source. So if light had a medium, you could get around it with having a preferred frame, which would be called an ether frame. Ether is would be another name for a medium of light. So a possibility to the situation we're considering is a preferred stroke ether frame, and that would be a more complicated theory explaining what is happening and what Open University is not dealing with, because it's not dealing with a complicated situation. It's instead dealing with the three simplest possibilities, and so it's ignoring the more complicated possibility of an ether, and ether gets more complicated because there are different versions of ether. I'm not agreeing with how the book is representing ether, and the book I'm using is to throw a different perspective on things than the Open University, but what the book then goes on to say, I'm not going to go agree with either. So you can read these various literatures on relativity, and one part of it you can say, oh, that seems right, then you go on to the next part of it and it seems, oh, that seems wrong, and that's the way it is. And so unfortunately the book which I'm using talks about the Michelson-Morley experiment and thinks it disposes of an ether theory, but it doesn't, because there are different versions of ether. And so the book itself is not going into sufficient details. If thinking in terms of simple ether theory, then maybe you can dispose of it, but there are more complicated versions of ether theory. So next, the Open University text will try to dispose of ether theory by appealing to empirical evidence. So on that issue, both the book and the Open University text are wrong, because they are dealing with a simple ether theory and not dealing with a more complicated versions of ether theory. What Open University says next is subject of part 3. But as it stands now, we can see the methodology being used by those teaching relativity. They're dumbing it down. When dealing with interpretation of empirical evidence, they are dealing with simple alternative possibilities to relativity and not the more complicated possibilities. It's thus, if you talk to believers in relativity that have gone through this dumbed down education, most of them are deceived and unable to talk about relativity versus alternative explanations, as they have been subjected to the more they have not been subjected to more complicated alternatives to relativity, but instead have only been subjected to dumbed down alternatives. So when it comes to a fight between relativity and alternative, the fight is rigged. Only a weak contender is chosen to fight against Einstein. So on the left you see this really muscle-bound person, and on the right you see a person who's quite a wimp. So one thump from the person on the left and the person on the right will go down. So this is what's happening with talking about relativity. Only a weak alternative is being presented to students by the educators. They're not dealing properly with a strong contender. It's all a rigged fight. Finish the end. Thank you.